Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Anish Chakravarti and I'm from University of Delhi. Today we will be discussing in detail about the topic normative theories and everyday life, some case studies. So let's talk about normative theories today and how they are pertinent and relevant to our everyday life situations, and we will see as to how they come of use through our case studies. So the definition of normative theories, let's look into that. What are normative theories? Normative theories are ethical frameworks that provide guidelines on how individuals should act. They prescribe the principles or rules for determining what actions are morally right or wrong. The purpose is that these theories aim to offer a systematic approach to evaluating actions based on moral standards, helping to determine the best course of action in various situations. So we have many kinds of normative theories. Primarily, we will be dealing and discussing three of them today. One is utilitarianism, second is deontology or deontological ethics, and the third is virtue ethics. Utilitarianism focuses on consequences of actions. The right action is the one, according to utilitarianism, that maximizes overall happiness or minimizes suffering. Deontology or deontological ethics centers itself on rules, duties, or obligations. An action is morally right if it is in accordance with moral rule or principle, regardless of the consequences. So in contrast, deontology doesn't align with utilitarianism in itself. Third, virtue ethics emphasizes character and virtues. It suggests that morally right action stems from a virtuous character, where virtues are traits like honesty, courage, and compassion. So we saw that there are three kinds of normative theories, and we'll be discussing them in further detail before we get into seeing their reflections and implications in our everyday life through case studies. What is the importance of normative theories in everyday life? Normative theories aren't just abstract ideas or theoretical principles. They play a crucial role in our everyday lives by guiding our decisions and actions. Whether we are deciding how to handle a difficult conversation, making a fair business decision, or choosing between conflicting responsibilities, these ethical frameworks help us determine the right course of action. For example, utilitarianism might lead us to choose what benefits the most people, while deontology or deontological ethics focuses on following moral rules and virtue ethics emphasizes acting with good character. These theories help us make consistent, thoughtful choices that reflect our values and contributes to a better, more ethical society. Now let's discuss in detail and try and understand what is utilitarianism, what are its basic principles and its tenets, and what it prioritizes. John Stuart Mill is one of the foremost proponents of the classical form of utilitarianism. He builds up upon another fellow philosopher, Jeremy Bentham, foundational ideas, refining the theory to address some of its limitations and deepens its ethical insights. While Bentham introduced the principle of utility and the hedonistic calculus, Mill focused on emphasizing and expanding these concepts to account for the quality of pleasures and complexity of human experiences. So, what is the principle of utility? According to Mill, Mill continues to endorse the principle which asserts that actions are morally right if they promote the greatest happiness of the greatest number. This principle is the cornerstone of utilitarian ethics and emphasizes the importance of considering the outcome of actions. Mill also distinguished between higher and lower pleasures. Since the aim of utilitarianism is to promote the greatest happiness of the greatest number, it is inherently important to see the significance of higher and lower pleasures. Mill's significant contribution is the distinction between higher and lower pleasures, and he argues that not all pleasures are of equal value. Higher pleasures are those of which the intellect, imagination, and moral sentiments beget and are nurtured, such as those derived from intellectual pursuits, artistic endeavors, and personal growth. Lower pleasures, in contrast, are more physical and sensory, such as those related to basic comforts of bodily satisfaction. Mill posits that higher pleasures contribute more significantly to human well-being and should be prioritized over lower pleasures. This qualitative approach to pleasure enriches the utilitarian framework by acknowledging the diverse nature of human experiences and values. So Mill, being a very realistic thinker there, supposedly, assumed and argued that if we want the society to welfare, individuals to welfare, be happy and conducive to good, we all have to prioritize towards maximization of our higher levels of pleasures. It's practically or idealistically not possible to achieve a universal happiness, but then we can always maximize it. So Mill kind of, in his utilitarianism, prioritized quality over quantity. He emphasized that the quality of pleasures is as important, if not more so, than their quantity. This refinement addresses a key criticism of Bentham's hedonistic calculus, which focused primarily on the amount of pleasure without distinguishing between different types of pleasures. Mill's approach ensures that more meaningful and enriching experiences are valued in moral decision making. So a decision in utilitarianism comes based on the consequences of the greatest happiness received by the greatest number of people in the society. The practical application of Mill's utilitarianism encourages evaluating action based on their ability to enhance overall well-being by promoting higher pleasures. This perspective provides a more nuanced approach to ethical decision-making, acknowledging that the value of action extends beyond mere numerical calculations of pleasure and pain. Mill's theory responds to some criticisms of utilitarianism also, such as the concern that it might justify actions that violate individual rights or principles of justice that leads to greater overall happiness. By incorporating the distinction between higher and lower pleasures, Mill's utilitarianism aims to uphold moral integrity while still focusing on the outcomes of actions. In summarized way, we can say Mill's utilitarianism refines the original utilitarian framework introduced by Bentham. By emphasizing this distinction between higher and lower pleasures and focusing on the quality of the experiences as the basis of consequences, utilitarianism provides a more sophisticated approach to evaluating moral actions as it argues for. The contributions of Mill enhance the utilitarian perspective by integrating a deeper understanding of human well-being and moral values. So this was about utilitarianism. Now let's move to the next one, which is the deontology or deontological ethics. Deontological ethics, as theorized popularly by Immanuel Kant, presents a moral philosophy that centers on the concept of duty and adherence to moral rules. Kantian ethics particularly emphasizes the morality of an action by determining it by whether it conforms to a set of rational principles rather than its consequences. This approach to ethics is grounded in the belief that there are objective moral laws that must be followed regardless of personal desires or outcomes. The main important concept of deontological ethics is the categorical imperative, a fundamental principle that dictates how individuals should act. Kant proposed several formulations of this imperative, but the most well-known are the universalizability. Act only in accordance to the maxim whereby you can, at the same time, that should be becoming a universal law. So Kant emphasized on universalizability. This means that one should act in a way that their actions could be universally applied without contradiction. Second is the humanity. Treat humanity, whether in your own person or in person of any other, always at the same time as an end and never merely as a means. This principle emphasizes respecting the intrinsic worth of individuals and not using them as them for solely personal gains. Also, one other important concept is of the duty and the moral law. Kantian ethics asserts that moral actions are performed out of duty, not because of personal inclination or pursuit of desired outcomes. According to Kant, moral actions must align with moral law, which is determined through reason and are universally applicable. The other important aspect is of the goodwill. Kant believed that the only thing that is good without qualification is goodwill. A goodwill is characterized by intentions to act according to moral principles, regardless of the consequences. The moral worth of an action is determined by the intention behind rather than its effects. Also, goodwill and the principle of duty allows moral autonomy, where individuals are viewed as rational agents capable of making their own moral decisions. Each person has the capacity and responsibility to determine their action based on rational principles rather than external influences. It contrasts itself with other theories. Unlike utilitarianism, which we discussed before, which assesses actions based on their outcomes and greatest happiness principle, deontological ethics focuses on the adherence to moral duties and principles, and not on consequences. It is distinct from virtue ethics also, which centers on character and virtue rather than specific action or rules. Virtue ethics will be the one which we'll be discussing shortly. Let's see the practical applications of the deontological ethics. It provides a framework for evaluating moral actions based on adherence to duty and rational principles. It demands the individuals act in a way that could be universally applied and respect the inherent dignity of others. So it emphasizes on the categorical imperative and not the hypothetical imperative. There's no condition there. So moral action is bound to be followed if it is universal and is within the rules of Kant or the deontological principles. This approach encourages moral consistency and integrity, ensuring that the actions are guided by commitment to universal moral laws rather than subjective preferences or expected results. So in summary, deontological ethics, particularly of Kant, offers a rigorous approach to morality based on duty, rationality, and respect for individuals, which we can call it as dignity. It emphasizes that ethical behavior is determined by following universal laws and acting from a good will, providing a clear and moral principle based on assessing moral actions. Let's come to the third theory of normative ethics, which is virtue ethics, briefly, so that we can talk about its applications and case studies. Virtue ethics is a philosophical approach that emphasizes the role of character and virtue in moral philosophy rather than focusing solely on the consequence of actions or adherence to universal moral rules, as in deontological ethics. Rooted in the works of Aristotle, virtue ethics considers an individual character as central to ethical decision making. According to this perspective, the morality of an action is determined by the virtues embodied by the individual performing the action, rather than by the action's outcome or conformity to the specific rules. So Aristotle, particularly, and other virtue ethicists emphasized on virtue, that is, development of a virtuous character, on positive traits or qualities that enable individual to live and to act in accordance to their moral excellence. These include traits like courage, temperance, and wisdom. For Aristotle, the ultimate goal of human life is achieving eudaimonia, which was translated as well-being, which is realized through practice of virtues as a constant self-regulation. Practical wisdom. Aristotle in his virtue ethics introduced the concept of phronesis or practical wisdom, which is the ability to make sound moral decisions based on deep understanding of virtue. Practical wisdom involves deliberation about what is right and appropriate in various situations, guiding individuals to act in accordance with their virtues. There is also a scope of moral development in virtue ethics, as virtues are not innate but developed through practice and education. This approach suggests that becoming virtuous involves moral good habits and making consistent moral choices over time. It also compares itself with other theories. Unlike deontology, which focuses on adherence to moral rules, and utilitarianism, which assesses, as we saw, based on actions on their outcomes, virtue ethics centers on the moral character of the agent. It does not merely judge actions by whether they follow rules or whether they maximize happiness, but looks at whether they are performed by a person of a good character. There can be examples of two individuals, Kaab and Bab. Kaab is naturally kind and help others out of instinct without much reflection on her actions. In contrast, Bab has actively developed kindness and a virtue through reflection and practice. According to virtue ethics, Bab demonstrates the true virtues because of her kindness is a result of deliberate moral development, while Kaab's actions, though good, do not reflect the same reflection of virtuous character. So we have a lot of practical implication of virtue ethics as well. Virtue ethics guides individuals to cultivate moral virtues and develop their character to navigate ethical challenges effectively. It suggests what ethical living involves striving for personal growth and moral excellence, rather than just following rules or seeking the best outcomes. By following on who are we are as individuals, virtue ethics encourages a more holistic approach to morality that integrates personal development with ethical behavior. So in summarized form, we can say virtue ethics provides a moral framework for understanding morality based on development of virtuous character traits and pursuit of personal excellence, offering a meaningful way to address ethical issues. Let's discuss the case studies that are there and see whether how we can see these and study these case studies in relation to the normative ethics. Let's take the first case of the workplace dilemma. Suppose you are a manager at a company and one of your employees, Jane, is underperforming due to personal issues. Her lack of productivity is affecting the team's overall performance, and there are complaints from other team members. The company's policies, which is a deontological rule, is to address underperformance through formal warnings, which could lead her to termination. However, you know that Jane is going through a tough time and believe she will improve once her personal situation stabilizes. Let's analyze these from the three normative theories, this situation. According to the deontological ethics, you should follow company's policy, issue a formal warning to Jane, regardless of her personal circumstances, because adhering to rules and duties is the right thing to do in most of the situations. Utilitarianism, on the other hand, would say to focus on the outcome that maximizes overall happiness and well-being. You might consider whether helping Jane through her personal issues, like for example giving her time off or reducing her workload, could improve her performance in the long run, benefiting the entire team. Virtue ethics, on the other hand, would ask what a virtuous person would do in this situation. Traits like compassion, understanding, and fairness would be considered. A virtuous manager might choose to support Jane through her difficulties, demonstrating empathy and kindness while balancing the needs of the team. So a possible resolution could come here with these three interpretations is that you might decide to have a private conversation with Jane to support and explore way to improve her performance, with immediately resorting to formal disciplinary action. This approach aligns with virtue ethics by showing compassion, considers the utilitarian perspective of aiming long-term team well-being, and still respects deontological duties by not ignoring company policies but seeking a compassionate application of it. The second case that we can consider to see normative ethics could be environmental responsibility. Let's take a company you work for produces a popular product, but the manufacturing process is harmful to the environment. You have the opportunity to suggest a switch to a more sustainable process, which could reduce environmental damage but increases costs. This could lead to a higher prices for consumers and potentially lower profits for the company, affecting employee bonuses. Let's analyze this situation. According to deontology, from a deontological perspective, the company has a duty to protect the environment and adhere to ethical business practices, regardless of the impact in profit or consumer prices. This duty might be rooted in a commitment to corporate social responsibility. Utilitarianism. A utilitarian would weigh the overall consequences, considering both the environmental benefits of the sustainable process and potential negative impact on consumer and employees. The decision should aim to maximize overall happiness and minimize harm. Virtue ethics would focus on the character of the decision makers. A virtuous leader would prioritize traits like environmental stewardship, responsibility, and integrity. This perspective might lead to advocating for the sustainable process, even at the cost of profits, because it aligns with the virtue of caring for the planet and future generations. So a solution or a resolution could be that we might propose a phased approach of implementing sustainable process, allowing the company to gradually adjust while educating consumers about the importance of environmental responsibility. This strategy seeks to balance deontological ethics, utilitarian outcomes, and virtuous behavior. So we can see that the third case study also answers these questions and see its application in normative theories. Let's see the medical ethics and patient confidentiality case and understand it. So you are a doctor treating a patient, and there's Mr. Chakravarti who has been diagnosed with a highly contagious and potentially life-threatening disease. Mr. Chakravarti insists that his diagnosis remain confidential because he fears social stigma and losing his job. However, he is not taking the necessary precautions to avoid spreading the disease to others, which puts the community at risk. So let's analyze this situation. Now, deontology, according to it, will say that you have a strict duty to maintain patients' confidentiality, as this is a cornerstone of medical ethics. Breaking confidentiality would violate this duty even if there are potential risks to others. And Mr. Chakravarti can be told to be at taking necessary precautions as a duty that he is supposed to strictly do. Utilitarians, on the other hand, would see it as a greatest good for the greatest number. In this case, breaking confidentiality might be justified to protect public health, as revealing the diagnosis could prevent spread of disease and save lives. Virtue ethics would consider the character traits a good doctor should exhibit, such as honesty, compassion, and responsibility. A virtuous doctor might seek a solution that honors patient confidentiality while also protecting public health, demonstrating wisdom and integrity. What could be a possible resolution? We could choose to have candid discussion with Mr. Chakravarti, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation and the potential harm to others. We might encourage him to voluntarily take necessary precautions or allow to notify relevant public health authorities without revealing his identity. This approach respects the deontological duty to maintain confidentiality, aims for utilitarian outcome, and minimize harms. So we saw that these three case studies brought the way in which different normative theories see these different case studies and how we can see that the evaluation of all the three of them were different. However, there is a possible resolution possible in most of these case studies. So normative theories are not merely abstract theories, but are very intrinsically and extrinsically applicable to real life situations, serious situations of life. So with this, we conclude and we see some important further readings that can be seen into the concept of normative theories and its respect in everyday life. So we can see a book on ethics and very short introduction by Simon Blackburn, Moral Philosophy, a Contemporary Introduction, an Introduction to Moral Philosophy by Wolff, The Elements of Moral Philosophy by James Rachels, Moral Theory and Introduction by David Morrow, and Practical Ethics by Peter Singer. Thank you very much.